Hi, I'm Tom Wilde, and I'm the CEO of Indico Data. I wanted to spend some time with you talking about our vision for the agentic future as it relates to automation within the insurance enterprise. We describe this as the decision era. Welcome to the decision era. And over the next few slides, I'll talk about what this means. What is the decision era, and how can you take advantage of it? To begin, I wanted to share some lessons learned from the front lines of developing and deploying automation and agentic solutions across the insurance enterprise. The first big lesson is testing is now more important than training. If you think back 5 years to the beginning of AI deployment within the enterprise, it was all about your training data. There was tremendous discussion about training data. Now, with agentic and generative AI, it's all about testing. You don't need as much training data anymore because of these large language models, but the need to test them for their performance, fidelity, and robustness to make them auditable so you can adhere to compliance regulations has become really important. So testing now is much more important than training. The next lesson learned is that context is more important than technology. What do we mean by this? Essentially, technology is now commoditized. Generative AI and large language models are accessible to anyone, including the insurance enterprise itself, vendors, and consultants. So it's no longer about creating unique technology. It's about understanding the context for the problem and how to use technology to apply that to the customer's challenge. Context more important than technology. The next is outcomes are more important than efficiency. I think in the early days of Gen AI, there was a lot of effort focused on trying to calculate things like cost savings or process efficiency improvements. What we've seen is that there's a much bigger opportunity to think about the ROI in terms of the outcome you're trying to drive. Simply trying to compare a pre-Gen AI approach to a post-Gen AI approach from just a labor saving standpoint is probably going to miss the mark. In fact, most customers we talk to are not trying to reduce headcount by using these technologies. They're trying to make their headcount much more powerful and capable, and therefore drive much bigger outcomes with the same number of people. And then lastly, little d decisions are more important, more impactful than big D decisions. What do we mean by that? What we mean is that you shouldn't try to boil the ocean at first cut. You shouldn't try to automate an entire major critical business process like underwriting. Instead, you should unpack those processes and find opportunities to automate the piece parts that seem to be bottlenecking or unlocking the real drive to the outcomes you're trying to achieve. So lowercase d decisions more important than capital D decisions, at least for the near term. So let's talk about data for a second. Obviously, we have to talk about data as it relates to any of these techniques. And to use an expression that a friend of mine at the Travelers likes to use, it's a race to the starting line. And by this, we mean that understanding what data is going to be important to drive improvements using generative AI and agentic AI is really critical. And we see data really living in three flavors: unstructured data, things like email and slips and policies and guidelines; semi-structured data, things like SOVs, loss runs, bordereau, often showing up in the form of a spreadsheet; structured data that lives in your CRM, your PAS, or third-party risk data. Getting that data in shape and understanding how you're going to attack that is really the race to the starting line, so you can take advantage of all these opportunities and unlock them. So the mindset here, once you've got that sort of starting mentality, is the decision supply chain. So when we talk about the decision era, we really overlay this with this notion of a decisioning supply chain. If you think about supply chains in the real world, like your smartphone, they know everything there is to know about the supply chain that goes into making that phone, the raw materials, the assembly of that, the testing and quality of that, the finished goods. What we find in the enterprise is that they haven't really applied that same mentality to decisioning. So if you think about a decision as the finished good and the raw material being that race to the starting line of your data, you can see just some examples of all the piece parts that go into going from raw material to a high fidelity, trustworthy decision. Ingest the data, extract it, validate it. How do you augment the data? the context for this decision in the form of being able to use Gen AI to consume previously unusable assets like long documents and PDFs, applying that using AI and human in the loop to get to this decision. And of course, very importantly, being able to keep track of each of those steps to make it explainable, auditable, and transparent. So this is what we mean by the decision supply chain mindset. What we've built is what we refer to as the Indico Decision Automation Platform, and it really has two halves. The first half we describe as delivering better data. This is our intelligent intake solution. This is the ability to take unstructured data and turn it into structured data that can drive a critical decision, a critical process. And that's the second half of our platform, Intelligent Insights. This is what we refer to as better decisions. By marrying better data, quality, trustworthy, accurate data, you're able to feed decisioning systems like next best action, agentic workflows, triage, those kinds of decisions to really capture the business outcome that's going to move the needle. So let me take you through a couple quick demos here with the help of one of my colleagues to talk about how this comes to life in the form of Indico's solutions, intelligent intake here and our triage solution on the insight side. So when we look at our intake solution, it starts with our agent gallery. So we've built hundreds of out-of-the-box agents that we've trained on insurance documents and insurance workflows so that you can get to market quickly with our solution. By chaining those agents together into a workflow, you're able to build an agentic workflow with a point-and-click interface. You can also build custom agents, and you can see here on the screen that I've decided to create a custom agent. This is going to be an extractive agent. I've named it broker presentation extractions. I'm going to set up the fields that I wish to extract from that broker presentation. That's going to start with me naming the fields and generating prompts within the Agent Studio that will allow it to extract that information in an accurate manner. I can also choose from a pre-configured pick list of fields that are likely to be part of such a document and build those into my extracted field list. Very importantly, this allows you to create your own data schema at the start so that when that data comes out the back end of that workflow, it's ready to be consumed by your downstream systems, your policy admin systems, and so forth. So how this would manifest itself in the real world, you can see that I've gotten a broker submission in my email inbox. If I'm an underwriting ops person, I move that into the Indico inbox. Indico picks that up, extracts the data, summarizes it, and returns an email to me with that submission summary. I can click on the link within that email to go drill into this and see all of the documents and the related extractions. And if I want to perform human in the loop on these, I could. Perhaps it's also set to straight through processing, and I'm only going to see extractions that are low confidence. I can also see summaries that I've built using a summarization agent of this presentation, so I can quickly assess what's inside this presentation and make that part of my overall data payload. I can easily navigate the fields of extracted data. I can make corrections and send that downstream into my submission queue. Now let's talk about triage. This is a really hot area in underwriting automation, which is not only generating the data required for the underwriting activities, but also automating the triage process. Today, this is a very cumbersome process involving many systems, many touches, often keying data into multiple systems, multiple times, very inefficient and not that accurate. So we're going to show you now our triage solution. I'm going to turn this to my colleague, Kevin McAdams, who's one of our senior solutions consultant. Over to you, Kevin.
We create a very structured inbox that's prioritized based on customer priority settings. It's got a risk appetite that's driven by either a very simplified customer developed risk appetite or through callouts to third-party risk calculators. And it allows you to see the key information needed to decide which submissions to work. This way, your underwriting ops teams or your clearance teams are focused on the submissions that are most in tune with your business objective, as opposed to just looking at the ones based on the order they come in. So here you'll see we have some agentic AI that makes recommendations about what's going on. So this one says that this submission needs attention, but the risk appetite is very high and the priority is very high. And again, we've got additional details in here to help where available with the processing of the submission. Now, if we were to look at something like this run here, which is a quote ready, very high, 100% in good order, we can almost straight through process this. And we believe that as customers become more and more comfortable with generative AI and AI automation and agents, they're going to be able to leverage straight through processing for very common, very high fidelity submissions. So in this example, the user could come in and see the summary of the submission. It's got all of the required attachments present. It's 100% quote ready. The next best action recommendation from our agentic AI is to clear the submission. The user can click that clear submission, and that submission is cleared. It's all done. They don't need to do anything. Now, when we say cleared, that means it's gone on to the next step in the process. So whether that's populating an underwriting workbench or putting the information into a system of record, that's where the data winds up going. Now, if we were to look at another submission, let's say this one here that's Summit Ridge construction, it needs attention, but it's in appetite and a high priority. Let's look at this one a little bit more closely. This one says it's not quite ready for completion, so it needs attention. We can actually come in here, we can kind of see this summary. Looks like maybe a schedule of values is missing, but let's start the clearance process on this and see what happens. So the first thing we get is the information about the submission. When was it received? Who was the named insured? Where are they located? And now you can see these are all data elements that have been extracted from the submission by Indico's intelligent extraction engine, and they're populated into this field. Now, if you see something like this, you might be able to click into it and say, okay, this Summit Ridge construction, okay, they're looking for this request. You can find some of the details about it, and you can actually start to look for other information that might help you fill this in. Now you can come down here and look at additional data that's been attached to the submission. You know, we do have mailing address information. We can confirm that it's not just the mention of Sudan. It's actually got a mailing address in there. But we can also come in here and see that the application and loss run are present, but the SOV was not. So now we can kind of keep looking through and say, well, there were no additional submissions shared for this yet. So we haven't been able to see any additional data. We can go in and look at each of the documents independently. So we can actually go and inspect this loss run and see what's happening, what fields are present, if there's a lot of information. We can look at the submission slip. And here we can actually maybe find information to use in that description, or perhaps not, right? But we're able to engage with the document and understand what is present in the submission and what may need additional information. Now, we may also come in here and say, let me change this and say, I know these guys, right? I've worked with them in the past, Summit Ridge Construction. They are oil field construction expert for wells and processing. So maybe you know them, right? Maybe you've done a lookup, maybe you've added that. I'm going to save this. And now my description is complete. You can see it still needs some attention. There is no broker located, no broker name that was extracted. And there's a variety of reasons why that might happen. But we can actually come in here and say, we're going to add this and say it's risk RPS. And we might even, and we might leave it at that and say RPS is the broker name. So now you can see we're actually claiming that it's quote ready because we've completed those last key obstacles. But you can see that the submission is still not complete, right? So this is Agentic AI reading the entire submission, is parsing the email, it's looking through each of the attachments, it's looking for the data extracted from each of those elements as well, and making decisions about what to do next. Now we can come down here, or we can come over here and say, you know, let's ask a question. Are there any operations outside of Sudan? So now we can actually engage with this. So we're on the fence. It's only 89% complete. We're missing a couple key things. I'd like to kind of check a couple additional things before I clear it on to the underwriter, right? I don't want to get yelled at. So you can look at this and say, okay, there really may not have been any other locations. Are there any risks I should be aware of? And we can go ask questions like that. So this lets you engage again at the submission level with both information that's extracted as well as information that you need to kind of make a decision in some of these edge cases. So now in this one, we might actually choose to back out of it and say, it's not complete. I'm going to wait for that loss run. I'm going to generate an email off to this broker and ask them for some details. But we can actually leave this submission and go back into the inbox to work on the next submission in the.
Awesome. Thanks, Kevin. And you can see that this has had real impact, and we call these decision-ready outcomes with the commercial space, specialty space, the kind of customers that we have supported now for many years. And the immediate impact here that we can generate for customers is reduction in processing time, faster speed to quote, increased underwriter capacity. These things translate into real dollar impacts for the customers you see on the screen there. And the use cases for agentic applications across insurance are quite broad. So what we've just taken you through is a specific deep dive into underwriting, submission intake, and triage. But we also have customers using us to do claims intake and first notice of loss, broker payment reconciliation, bordereau processing. There's just a wealth of opportunity to gain business outcomes from using and applying agentic solutioning to the many, many forms of unstructured data and today, largely manual processes that exist, especially within commercial and specialty. Thank you very much. Hope this was useful to you. We look forward to continuing the conversation. Please don't hesitate to drop me a note if you have any questions or comments on the presentation. Thank you.